Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I'm here today with Brianna Wu, and we're going to be talking about probably trans politics,
Oh boy.
why medical transition is important, things like that.
We could just
So,
throw the entire show out and talk about movies instead, or this Brad and Jen drama that's going on right now. We could do any of that and not talk about trans politics today if you would like.
uh, I actually don't know any about Brad and Jen, and I don't really watch many movies. It's hard to commit to sitting
Really?
still for an hour and a half at a time.
You're
Um,
in, like, on your channel, your entire profile is very East is East and West is West. Like, you're a very serious person. It's kind of intimidating, to be honest.
uh, I had I'm very unserious in ways too, but like in terms of the gender stuff, I kind of like know what I'm trying to do.
Well, what are you trying to do?
Um, trying to make it so that when people experience feelings of wanting to be the other sex or
Oh,
emotional distress about not being able to be, that they can have access to information that helps them make sense of it in a way that doesn't demonize them. And so that,
yeah.
because I think right now a lot of people are not being served by the sort of like transgender ideology or religion, so to speak.
Religion. Oh my goodness. The Church of Blanchard? Is that what we're going to talk
No,
about today?
well, I mean, I don't consider that a church. I consider it like a scientific work in progress.
Yes, and
But
deeply imperfect scientific work, in my opinion.
yeah, well, I mean, yeah, we can talk about
So I
that.
want to actually give you a
Yeah.
compliment today. Like I feel like so much of the discussion about AGP and stuff like that is always like you're always out there super serious, and you're like, oh, AGP is about like helping people with autosexuality understand themselves. And of course, I think it does do that. Like it certainly helped so many of my friends. But for me, it like really helped me understand why I consistently felt well, it did two things. Like one, it helped me understand, like, gosh, why did I have this lifelong fascination with the same kind of female pop stars that gay men do? Like, am I really a gay man? What's going on there? And secondly, I feel like it helped give me like a bit of perspective of why I've always felt this like distance between the community and myself. And I want to be really clear. It's not that I don't believe there's a hierarchy. I don't think like one type is better than the other. I've done plenty of freaky stuff myself, so no judgment there. But I think the other part of it is I think at the core of Blanchardism, there's a formula to help people like understand themselves that I think is really, really helpful, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for people to be able to understand themselves when the solution, like the way of addressing those feelings is as serious as transsexualism.
Yeah,
Like, you know.
yeah. You're kind of committing to a lot of stuff, I think.
Right. And you can't kind of ahead of time can't know whether it's right for you. It's somewhat a leap of faith. Like no amount of knowledge will like fully
Do you think
make it.
so?
Um, I think there's a lot of people that transition that there's not complete certainty that it's the right choice for them. I mean, I'm sure for the most like strongly predisposed transsexuals that
Yeah.
there is no doubt, but I think that's a small proportion of transitioners.
Do you think so? Like, this is where I find, and this is why I really find your channel interesting, because for a long time I made the mistake with my trans politics of assuming everyone was exactly like me. So if you go into like the DSM or whatever, or if you go, okay, give me a typical case study of someone with gender dysphoria, you know, boom, boom, said they were a girl from this age, said this, did this, interested in men, blah, blah, blah. And like, I was like, oh, well, everyone's like that. And all this Blanchardism stuff is just bullshit. And that's really not the truth. So I think one way to think about it, and I would love to know if this makes sense to you, is I do think symptomology indicates treatment. So I think if you are that kind of classical case study and you're hitting every single point of the DSM like very strongly, I think that gives you a lot more certainty the treatment is going to be good for you. I think, we talked in DMs about you being like more of a type 4 transsexual where you're kind of more borderline. And I think in that case, there's a lot of value in people really understanding the pathology so they can make choices that are good for them. Or maybe you have a different perspective. I don't know.
I mean, no, I agree that understanding the sort of the symptomology is helpful for making the decision about whether to transition.
Rocket, stop that. Sorry.
I mean, yeah, I thought it was funny. The dog in the background. Yeah. Yeah, I think the when I read the DSM, like I see the two categories implicitly described in it. It of course does not describe them explicitly because there was tremendous activist pressure to stop that from happening.
Yep.
But it does describe an early onset trajectory and a late onset trajectory, and those are
Yep.
euphemistic for the homosexual and autosexual types. And it describes these for both sexes as well. Like it even says that the female to male transitioners who transition after puberty are often attracted to men. And so, yeah, I think it's interesting how the DSM sort of implicitly it shows the sort of like two type model thing that I'm an advocate for. But of course, like the people that wrote it were often the people like I think Blanchard probably had a hand in like how that section was constructed. And so of course it reflects his work.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I guess, one of my, I hope we can just I hope if I disagree with you on some stuff, it's not, it doesn't feel personal. It's like me trying to find the right truth or public policy or whatever. But I guess I would want to ask you, I have a lot of really good trans friends, right? And some of them will just flat out say, I'm AGP. This makes a lot of sense to me. And
Hell
some
yeah.
of them are a lot more torn on it. And some of
Mhm.
the women I know best that they're genuinely in good faith, very self-aware types would have no issue, I believe, just saying I feel this way. They're looking at these types and they don't totally feel like it explains their experiences, and I think I would agree with that to a certain extent. So to what extent do you think this typology, do you think it's a finished work, do you think there's more to it? How do we kind of drill down more? And I agree with you, there are two categories, but there does seem to be a little bit of overlap with everyone. Or do you disagree with that?
I think if there is overlap,
Hmm.
it would probably be more likely among the female to male
Hmm.
transsexuals. I do think in male to female, it's pretty much distinct. And I know that there are some trans women who have sincerely introspected about it and don't think that either category fully describes their experience. But I don't think the category is supposed to. It's supposed to like not explain literally everything about a person's experience because we are
Sure.
more than our sexual
Oh,
orientations. There's
100%.
right.
Yeah.
So it's um
I like one example of that. Yeah, I talked about this in my coming out video. When I was going through puberty, I nearly got raped by a man at our church, which sent it really affected my sexual development because I had to get over all these fear of being around men, and it really quadrupled down on the shame I was feeling for being attracted to men. And I think, oh my God, I mean, I started getting crushes on boys like the same time everyone else did. I think I was in my 20s the first time before I ever really started, dating or making out with men. So, I'm just saying, stuff happens and it can affect you if that makes sense to you.
well, yeah, like I was saying, we are more than just our orientations, and we're gonna have a bunch of different life experiences that cause us to change in various ways. And it affects our trajectory.
Sure.
Um, but I think that the what a lot of people don't understand is that the category that autogynephilia describes of individuals, there's a lot of diversity within that category of how it's
Hmm.
expressed and felt. And so it can seem to some people that it's crazy that one concept can supposedly explain so many widely different um, presentations.
Sure.
But um, as far as I can tell, it does seem that there's just those two types of male to female transsexualism.
Okay. No, I agree with you. It's describing two broad categories. I guess what I would like to see is, when I look at like the studies of this, I mean, it's you've got to agree it needs more research, right? It needs higher quality research. So I would love to see that continued. I
Uh,
wish if I could get anything for the NIH to do, I would love to see like us allocate a ton of money, shake out this non-binary stuff, figure out what is the cause of this, research a ton more into Blanchardism. Does everyone that's autosexual, do they need to transition? As best as I can tell, I think you were probably served from not transitioning, right? So, like developing a clinical pathology around that, it seems to me to be a very important job, but maybe you disagree with that.
no, I mean, I'm in favor of the stuff being understood more broadly, and it's particular by clinicians, because right
Mhm.
now, most trans people, if they went to a clinician, the clinician would not know that there's distinct
No,
types of trans,
nope.
and therefore they wouldn't be able to tell which type of trans am I dealing with, because it's fundamentally different psychologies. And it's just the clinicians don't even have a 101 level understanding of the
Nope.
psychology, and since it just worries me that basically since gatekeeping has been done away with for political reasons, it sort of makes it so the patients themselves have to be their own gatekeepers, and I
Yeah.
think that that's important for them to understand why they want this treatment.
Oh my gosh, that's so well said, Phil. I 100% agree with that. So, on that point, I've seen so many interviews on your channel. I've never seen anyone interview you. So, I want the people that watch your channel to understand your story. So, like, when did you first start figuring all this stuff out? Why have you decided not to transition, kind of, or at least for now? What is kind of your story? What's going on?
Um, well, I had various conflicting gender feelings in my 20s or so. My
Mhm.
gender issues were later onset.
So, you didn't feel
Thank
anything as a child?
um just a I mean, there's intermittent thoughts or feelings or experiences here and there, but like
Yeah.
nothing really that came to the forefront and started being influential until my 20s, I would say.
That's
Um,
really hard for me to
yeah.
understand, and I'm not saying that to be judgy, it's just, like, I literally can't imagine it.
Well, I think part of it I didn't have in my environment growing up. I
Mhm.
didn't have any female friends. Like they just didn't live on the streets that I happen to live
Aw,
on, and no sisters or anything. There's very little like stimuli in my like childhood environment that would have probably triggered autogynephilic lines of thinking in terms of
sure.
like seeing women's clothing around and things like that. So I had it onset later. I started having some gender dissatisfaction in my 20s, but it wasn't until 31 that I encountered the concept of autogynephilia and started
Mhm.
really looking into it. And it kind of blew my mind that like this seemed to be explaining so many different things, and also like why didn't anyone tell me about this? You'd think it like
Oh,
it would be like imagine if like gay gay men just were not told that homosexuality existed. Like that was just completely hidden from them.
yeah,
And they were wondering, why do I feel this way for so long? In past centuries, like a lot of them had to deal with this where there was no category for what they were, at
sure.
least in terms of homosexuality.
But did you not I mean, just forgive me because 'cause I'm just trying to I we're it's so hard for me to, like, square the circle because on some level, we're the same thing, but we're also not. And I think that's really interesting to unpack. So, like some of my earliest memories are of being segregated by gender in kindergarten, and really having that freak me out. Did you not like? Did you play with boys and enjoy that growing up? What was that like for you?
I was typical boy growing up. I mean, not sort of like the sort of an introverted,
Yeah.
quiet type, kind of like the Asperger's profile, not like not necessarily like overtly masculine in terms of sports and all
Hmm.
that, but definitely not feminine.
I feel like, I mean, for me, I was punished so much for being myself that, I was forced to take on that mask. So, I mean, I think I understand what you're talking about, but it was very much driven out of me, if that makes sense, to the extent that it could be. Like, I don't know. I remember like everyone would make fun of me for like talking like a valley girl, even at 12 in the South, which was very, very embarrassing. But I don't know. I think like I guess this is what's hard for me to understand is if it's not like do do autosexuals, is it not like I guess I just can't this is what I find so weird when you look at trans culture sometimes. Like you look at it seems to me every other group out there, like black people or gay men, like they've written the most beautiful novels about their experiences that really get down to the human condition. And something that's always really bothered me is if you look at like the great trans novels, like unpacking what we've gone through. I mean, what do we have? Nevada, not that good. I'm sorry. Detransition baby, pretty
I thought
good.
Nevada was all right, but
Nevada's okay, but it's like most
yeah,
of the art we produce about ourselves is smut and porn. And it's really hard to identify with that. So,
right.
it's
And
like,
it's like I
we're,
wonder why that might
yeah,
be. That so much of it is
yeah.
sexual in nature, you know?
I don't
Like,
understand that.
I mean, I do, but like,
But
um,
it's like I it's like the stories start off and it's like the few stories where the character actually wants to be a girl, right? It's like, gets into the heartache and that's like 5% of it. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is good. This speaks to me. This speaks to my soul. And then it's just whore town right after that. It's just like, what are we
yeah,
doing, y'all?
yeah. I haven't actually read too much of the trans, like the community literature, so to speak.
Yes.
I was told to read Nevada by trans women online when I said I thought I was autogynephilic, and they told me that that was not not a real thing and that I was wrong. And
What?
they told me to
What?
read Nevada and Whipping Girl and stuff like that. And I did read those things. I just found them unconvincing. But I think Nevada shows really well, like sort
Nevada
of the
has an
angst.
AGB character in it. It just does.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like it's an AGP main character that is
Two.
like it's ego dystonic about being autogynephilic, where
Sorry, ego
he
dystonic, what does that mean?
oh, that it's upsetting to her self-image. That um that
Oh,
seeing herself as autogynephilic is upsetting to her, and it is that I think that novel captured really well the inner angst that some autogynephilic trans women have about the concept that explains some of their experiences.
where do you think that this is something I also don't understand. Where's that shame like coming from? Because I
Well,
think
it's
like
a
more trans
form of
women need to,
sexuality, so like
but
shame will kind of come along with it
I
for a lot of
guess it's
people.
like go date some men and learn what men are into, and there's all kinds of freaky stuff that's out there. Like on Agotophilia seems relatively tame to me, but
No, it is tame.
yeah,
Like it's yeah, it's just heterosexuality pointed inward,
yeah,
but it so I that's why I prefer to describe it as a sexual orientation. Just I think it's more accurate, and I think it conveys to people. It conveys how it feels better than calling it like a fetish or a paraphilia. Because when people when basically the haters like turfs and stuff when they just throw around the word fetish and paraphilia repeatedly as if it those words are arguments in and of themselves,
right.
it's like, okay, I get that they're trying to demonize for their political cause, like whatever, but it's not relatable. Like someone that has autogynephilia, they're not gonna
Mhm.
hear that it's a fetish and then have
But
that make as much sense
but I
to
don't
them.
agree with that, Phil, and I hope I can say this respectfully, but I think that's not the nail that they're getting at. Where I think there are a lot of people that are autosexual and their presentation, like just respectfully, there's not much that's feminine about it. The behavior is very male coded, it's very aggressive, it's very threatening. There's no attempt to get along with people. And I think that's where the fetish talk comes from Turf Town, because they're going like, how do I classify this? And it doesn't feel like there's a lot of it just doesn't, it feels off, if that makes sense to you. So I think that's the origin of it, or maybe you disagree.
Uh, I mean, to some extent, I agree in the sense that I think much of the turf hatred of autogynephilic people is just that
Mhm.
they don't like male sexuality, period. You know, because they're coming from a feminist tradition that often demonizes male sexuality because sometimes it is enacted in an oppressive way, so to speak.
How do you see male sexuality as being I guess I've just never thought about that. What can you explain more about that?
Oh, just that because of the bad experiences many women have had with dating
Yeah.
men,
Yeah, it's terrible.
that therefore they're put off, like some the feminists that you know are displeased about men enough to organize to you know kind of fight against patriarchy. They don't like male sexuality because maybe they've had bad experiences, or at least they've heard plenty of their friends have bad experiences, and so
Yeah, men
they're
are
just
creeps. They
fearful of
just
it.
are. Yeah.
Statistically more likely for men to be creeps, yeah.
Yeah. Like, there's no
um
girl on the planet that doesn't have bad experiences dating. Oh my gosh, especially trans girls. Like, go look at the straight trans girl subreddit, which is my favorite subreddit. And there was a story today about some girl that's out there, and some guy that's interested in her and figures out that she's trans, like, looks at her leggings and figures out that she's post-op and just ghosts her. It's like, oh my god, that is so terrible. Like, there's nothing
oh
about dating men that's great, like, but you have to,
yeah,
so
right, yeah, no, if you have the curse of being attracted to men, you do have to date them. Yeah.
So
um
let's get back to you. Okay, so you've got like a more typical childhood or whatever. You kind of figure
yeah, it's
this
pretty
out.
male typical
Yeah,
childhood.
yeah.
um
You figure it out at 30, and then
yeah.
how do you are you in therapy at that point? Are you thinking of transitioning? Are you looking at like what kind of goes into your calculus to kind of stay a type 4? Where is that kind of coming from?
I'm 6'4",
Sure.
um and yeah, it's just if I were to be trying to approximate a womanly aesthetic, I think I'd be more emotionally distraught about trying and failing than just basically just more or less being like, yeah, I'm a man and
Mhm.
I know why I wear women's clothes and it's fine. Um, yeah, I just don't think transition would be ultimately beneficial for me because of basically my skeletal situation. If
Sure.
oh, I think something that a lot of the older clinicians got right was considering passing as a factor in whether someone would benefit from transition.
Mhm.
And yeah, so basically, is I learned about autogynephilia. I did not think, um, I didn't think it would be good for me to transition, but I stopped repressing at that point, and
What does that look like to you?
mostly it just meant that I switched to wearing women's clothes. Um, and of course, like I spent a lot of effort learning about autogynephilia.
Mhm.
Um, and I just learned too much at one point to not turn it into something that could sort of explain it for my kind. And so I set about doing that, which is what that's the book I wrote, Autoheterosexual.
I really enjoy your blog, by the way. I like mainlined it all in one afternoon. And I'm going, yep, I agree with that. If you actually look at some of my TV appearances, I actually crib from your blog and steal some of your ideas. So thank you
Good.
for that.
Yeah.
It's been very helpful, actually.
Yeah. And I don't need credit. I just want the ideas to get out there. Um, it's, yeah, I think it's appalling to me that there's so much cultural conflict over transgenderism and when people aren't even talking using real constructs.
Mhm.
Th So they talk past each other, and it becomes a moral fight between 2 sides do trying to get rid of evil and be the good guys, and meanwhile, neither of them are their models are not, corresponding to reality enough, and I just think it's really bad that the culture war has gotten to this point that transgenderism is, like, taking up nearly as much oxygen as it does. It should not be
Oh,
this
no.
big it should not be this prevalent of an issue.
But don't
Uh,
you think we've kind of forced it? I mean,
like the transgender movement.
yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to
Yeah.
be mean or whatever, but yeah, I am currently, even as we're recording this today, I am in a DEFCON 5 like fight with trans Twitter because I personally do not like the phrase birthing people. I don't like people with uteruses. I don't like pregnant person. I think it's really insulting to cis women to reduce them down to their body parts. And I have the unmitigated gall to say so publicly. And of course, this is a terrible sin. And, I can't get pregnant. This doesn't affect me. But I know for a fact a lot of my cis women friends, they hate this. They really, really hate this. And I feel like there are so many points where, this expanded movement that we've got, it is gone, well, this is the moral thing to do. This is how we feel. We have a right to this. And there's no plan to get buy in from the public. There's no plan to deal with the externalities. There's no plan to do any of it. And it's just like the legitimate like political actors are sitting here going, oh my goodness, how can we like get legislators in this state to agree to this bill and stop the Republicans? And they just hate us because of the like, it's not just that these legislators have been attacked by trans Twitter before, but the message has just become so completely political and sellable. Like, leave out the ethics of pregnant person. Like, what's the plan to just get normal women to agree to this? And no one seems to care. It's bananas to me.
Yeah, I don't like the language that sort of tries to eliminate female as a category.
No,
Like the
it's
TERFs, they call it
terrible.
female erasure. Um,
Yes, it is.
and I don't think like trans people are a very small minority. I don't think they can just unilaterally decide to redefine major words like man and woman, like, and then have everyone go along with it.
That's right.
It's not politically possible. I'm not even talking about like whether it's moral. It's literally not possible, and it's going to cause backlash.
Yes.
And yeah, so like when I talk about like the transgender religion, I'm talking about like kind of the whole ideology that came along with the movement, not like the trans people themselves, but sort of that that online hive mind that has very particular
Yeah.
views on things and is very strident.
But it's neurotic. This is the feature
Yeah.
I've really been looking at science lately to try to understand. Why is trans Twitter so neurotic? And what I mean by neurotic is I mean emotional dysregulation and very willing to take out these mercurial emotional states on other people in really hostile ways that just push normal people away. Why? I mean, first of all, do you agree with that assessment that trans Twitter is extremely neurotic? And like, why are these traits so linked? Because I think you can get into minority stress or repeated trauma and all of that. It's convenient because it's blaming other people, but there's
Right.
clearly some part of the trans community that is just unwilling to think about their actions and how it affects other people. Or maybe you disagree.
I think that on average, trans people are going to have more mental disorders
Yeah.
than people that are not trans, and I think this is because the things that cause transness are atypical sexualities, and
Hmm.
so basically something went off the rails in normal development, like something made someone not conventionally heterosexual, and I think when stuff goes off track like that, often other things end up a little off too, and so
Hmm.
I think that's why sexual minorities, say like bisexuals and gays, they have higher rates of mental disorders. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's because of minority stress theory. I think that theory gets the causation wrong. I
Yeah.
think it's just an inborn greater predisposition towards mental illness, and that this, of course, is reflected in the numbers.
Yeah. So it sounds like you think trans people are mentally ill.
Um, on average, they have higher rates of mental illness compared to the non-trans
Well,
population,
I mean GID
I would say.
itself. Oh, I'm sorry. That's an old school term. I meant gender dysphoria. Do you
Yeah,
think
I
like
mean,
me, because I've transitioned, and if I go to the DSM today, I go, okay, desire to be the opposite sex? Nope. A desire to get rid of my secondary traits. Like, do you think I've dealt with gender dysphoria and I'm no longer mentally ill? Or do you think I still have mental illness in your view?
I would say that you would still qualify for gender dysphoria. because
Mhm.
were that treatment to be taken away,
Yeah.
the symptoms would resurface.
Oh, yeah.
So, I think you would still qualify for the diagnosis of that
That's fair.
disorder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really care. It's so weird to me that trans people are so hostile to like the idea of being mentally ill. And it's like, y'all, come on, this gets us our health care. This is why Obamacare covered
Right,
this
I
in the
know.
first place.
Exactly.
Like, just take the win, sister. Come on.
Yeah, like, get over the hit to your ego and just be glad that it's giving you access to something more important, which is the medical
Yes.
transition.
So this is something I wanted to talk to you about today, Phil. I think you and I, we don't have the exact same politics, but we have similar politics in the sense that I think we're more moderate in what we want to do. And I think we're willing to look at the science and try to arrive at better public policy. So I wanted to ask you, like, what has the personal cost been to you to kind of stick out more of a position in the middle? Because for me, it's been awful. Like, I don't like dealing with these people.
Well, I mean, I did start out politically much more left. I wrote in Bernie for president in 16 and 20, for example. Like like,
Whew.
to give you an
I gotta
idea.
go. Bye, y'all.
Yeah, yeah, I know, the inner DNC operative inside you is like, "Ooh, should have voted for Hillary." But, um, yeah, no, I've become less left-leaning,
Yeah,
and I did this because I learned more, and I found that a lot of leftists, they assert things because it fits in with their political wishes, but it doesn't correspond to reality.
yeah.
And
I
I
unfortunately have to agree with that.
y right, and, like, leftists want everyone to be equal, and so they assert that everyone basically is equal, but empirically, that's not the case,
Yeah.
and so that's led me it led to a reorganization of my politics.
Huh. I understand that. I mean, look, I'm Team Democrat all day long. Yeah, if you vote for, I don't, if you write in Bernie again, I'll still be your friend. I mean, it's in second thoughts. Yeah, we may have some words about it at dinner sometime. But I really understand what you're talking about. It being very disenchanting. For me, it's really, I don't understand why we can't just talk about the science with this. Like when I think about, I grew up in Mississippi, and one of the things that allowed me to escape the religious right was the fact that, when I was talking economic policy or racial justice, the Republicans in my life had a very moralized argument about all these things. Like, well, gay people can't get married because it says so in the Bible. It doesn't, but that was their argument. Whereas, when you talk to Democrats, it would be a very look, tariff policy should be this because of this study and this argument, and this is going to increase here. This is why NAFTA is good. And it's really, I don't have a better word for it except distressing to see, the left really fall into moralizing is the only argument they seem to be able to make. And I think trans Twitter is really, really guilty of this.
I mean, yeah, trans politics online when discussed by trans people, it's incredibly moralistic. Because and to be fair, to accomplish political goals, you have to invoke morality because morality is sort of it's something people have as part of their psychology to form
Sure.
group to work together on actions together. But I just think trans people kind of overdo the political aspect of being trans,
Yeah.
and if they could chill out on being paranoid about the politics, they might feel happier.
Can I give some advice out there to younger trans people that may not know this? So back in the 90s, trans women were actually the coolest motherfuckers that ever existed, especially in the 2000s. Like we were sexy, we were interesting. We were doing cool stuff. And we weren't out there like preaching the gospel of tankyism to normals on MTV or whatever. Like, if I could get trans Twitter to do anything, it's like make trans people cool again. Because we are cool. I'm sorry. Like, we got a unique life experience. Like, oh, I don't know. Like, at least the friendships I make, it's filled with people where being trans is not the center of their existence. Like, in fact, it can actually give you a lot of grit to go do some other cool things with your career. So I wish more trans people would like turn off this politics to a certain extent.
Yeah, it would be good because they get worried about the politics and they think that basically all of society is trying to oppress them, and it makes them scared to go outside. It makes them more neurotic. Where if they could just not pay attention to that stuff, and like if they want to do hormones, then like they can do that. But like if they just do transsexualism and worry about figuring out their own situation instead of working for the cause, so to speak, then I think as individuals they would tend to be happier if they sort
Yeah.
of just stuck to that.
I have to admit, since coming out publicly, it's made my life so much worse, Phil. Like, it's awful. Like,
In what
I'm not.
ways?
Well, I get called a man 50 times more a day, like 5,000% more, which is just really frustrating. And, it's not that I didn't think people could figure it out occasionally. Like, before I came out, I just deliberately never talked about it in my public role. It's just awful. Like, it's all anyone, like, I wouldn't say it's all anyone ever talks about, but it's just the effort to dehumanize me is a billion times worse. But to be just really honest with you, the worst part of coming out publicly has been trans Twitter, which are just fucking assholes. I
They're
don't have a
ruthless.
better.
Yeah.
No, I swear to God, I mean this. I put the video out on the first day, and the comments were, "Holy shit! I had no idea, Brie. Love you, support you. What a touching story. This helped me understand transsexuals more. Thank you so much." And then trans Twitter got their hands on it the next day, and the whole playbook and how it goes. So, yeah, I feel like trans Twitter is really unpleasant, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Twitter's unpleasant. And trans Twitter is more unpleasant. So that but I found that among the trans sort of the orbit I hang out with is more the people that know they're autogynephilic or autoandrophilic and is way more chill, I think, because they've worked through some of the like
Yeah.
shame or like how they worry about like basically they've gotten over their neuroticism about having the orientation and they own it.
Well,
And
at
they
least
seem
as much as any of us can. Like, it's a
right.
lifelong process.
And they seem much more grounded and calm in comparison
Yes.
to the broader trans Twitter.
Yeah, it's hard to find. I also think, I mean, maybe it's different. And just to be really honest, like, most of my really close trans friends tend to be into men. I just feel more in common with them, more of a vibe, I guess. But there seems to be more of an ability to get along with people, even if you don't agree. Like, one of the people I love the most is Danielle. She's a Trump voting Republican that lives down in down south. But there's a shared value as far as trying to make a life for ourselves and integrate as much as I can, and really loving our husbands and valuing that. And that's what I personally look for with friendships.
Yeah, and it's good to be able to find those pockets of relatively sane
Yeah,
trans people so that so you realize that it's possible to be sane as a trans
yeah,
person.
yeah.
Um, I'm curious, like, what motivated you to start talking about autogynephilia on Twitter? Because I noticed you did, and I was like, "Ooh, that's brave," and I like it.
It was all a plot to get you to follow me, Phil. That's why I did it, because I liked your work. No, it was, I guess. So the reason I came out publicly was I think it's time to have some adults steering the ship with a little bit more experience messaging things for the public and raising money. No matter what you think of me, I spend every single week talking to legislators, trying to preserve our rights. I do it for free. No one pays me to do it. I just sign on to projects and help, something I usually charge a lot of money for. So and I realized for me to do this, I really need to take more of a public role, because I don't see people out there that don't have extreme, like non-extreme trans politics, willing to talk about this stuff publicly. So as we're going along with this, and I think this is something you're going to identify with, I am worried that AGP has become a shorthand by our political enemies for the bad trans. And,
Yeah.
I just don't think that's good, because there's also a public policy mission to deny AGP healthcare, which is just crazy and anti-scientific. So I just feel like, I mean, it's one of those things that would be much easier to keep my mouth shut, but I feel like there's a need to go, hold on, just because someone's autosexual doesn't mean they're not a legitimate trans person. It doesn't mean we need to deny them healthcare. So it was an ethical stand. Does that make sense to you?
Right. And it's as part of your broader focus on maintaining access to medical care.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, I have noticed that the autogynephilia gets demonized by the right and by TERFs and such, and I think that was allowed to happen because the trans women themselves have stayed out of the conversation and they let their
yeah,
enemies define it. And I think that was a long. I could see why they wanted to stay out of that conversation because it was emotionally distressing for them.
sure.
But I think that might not have been the most strategic way of going about it.
I mean, I don't know. I think it's really hard to talk about sexual stuff in a public role. Do you know what I mean? So I don't like begrudge anyone, but I think it's a narrative that's taking hold, and we need an answer for it. Yeah, I'm probably not the person to do this, right? Like, just it's not my it's just not my mission. But as much as I can, I want to like turn this narrative around. So I would really encourage, like, we need more sane people in general, working on trans public policy. So I would urge like any media savvy AGP people to come forward. If you've got savvy politics and a media background, come work with me. I could use some help.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I want there to be more autogynephilic propagandists to
But what
sort
would
of.
that look like? What would that look like?
I mean, it could look like anything. Like it could. It's basically making media and making connections to get something done. Like either writing things, making videos, or posting. Basically, it's spreading ideas, memes, um, to try to create an environment where people take a certain sort of political action. And I
Cool.
think the goal here would be to sort of to make it clear that just because someone's AGP or AAP, that it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be a good candidate for medical transition.
Oh God,
Uh,
no. Yeah, of course.
because if the risk here for access to medical transition is if the policy becomes the autosexuals can't have medical transition,
It's
that
terrible.
effectively it's just
Yeah,
going to stop transition as a
100%.
whole.
And you're gonna have
Yeah,
people lying about being attracted
yeah,
to men, which is not gonna be helpful for anyone.
right.
So
And that's historically what happened, and that's
I
where
think
the
this is a lie. I
yeah.
do not think this is true. I think this is a myth that's been repeated over and over again until y'all believe it. There's no evidence I've ever found for this.
For what?
Maybe it was true in the 60s that they did this, but in the 80s, 90s, and beyond, there's never been a pressure to go date men. This is just a lie.
Well, so I mean, Fisk wrote about it in '74, for example. Like when he coined the term gender dysphoria syndrome, he
Sure,
wrote about how it seemed like the patients, they all seemed to be coming in with the same exact story, and coincidentally, it matched the image of classic transsexualism portrayed in the literature. And he realized, oh, they're all just lying to get what they want, basically. And so he decided it'd be more important to determine the amount of distress they have around their gender
sure.
traits rather than categorizing whether a true transsexual. And
It's the stupidest term ever. I mean,
yeah,
I
but
come on, Phil. Like, get real. In my lifetime, in your lifetime, do you truly believe, like, when I was in the 90s and like no one ever asked me if I was attracted to men as part of this, it came up incidentally, but it was not the focus of anything. Do you really think that therapists, which tend to be leftist, Obama voting, like gay supporting people that would have any interest in this in the first place, do you really think in modern times they're out there going, well, you better be attracted to men or I'm not going to write this Benjamin's letter for you? I mean, come on. That's bullshit. It's
I mean,
obviously
I don't think
bullshit.
that's happening so much anymore. And like you
Yes.
like you said in the 90s, it didn't happen to you. And I think
Right.
part of that is that um at least in the US it's not happening anymore. There's plenty of different countries, and each clinician's office is a different office. So there's going to be some cases where it still
But it's a
happens.
victimization narrative. Come
But
on.
I think that Blanchard's work is actually useful in liberalizing access to care because once his typology showed that those who were not homosexual could also benefit from gender dysphoria, from treatment of gender dysphoria. It made it so people stopped asking so much about the orientation of patients.
Mm, no one ever asked me. So,
Right. Well, I mean, Blanchard's typology was like first published in '89, so it would have started having that liberalizing effect um, starting around then.
maybe people that go into therapy just don't care that much. I really just think you misunderstand the kind of it's like cops like guns because they go into that field. Like I think most people that go into therapy are cool gay people. I think that's pretty common sense.
I mean, yeah, it's bleeding hearts that go into therapy for the most
Yeah.
part.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not doubting that. I'm just saying that historically there was gatekeeping based on sexual orientation, and I'm
Way
glad it.
back in the day. Way back in the day.
Well, it takes a while for changes to percolate. Like
All
you
right,
just
all right. We're not going to
it
agree on
does.
this. That's fine.
Yeah. I mean,
But I this is something I do want to talk to you about because when I transitioned, just hand to God, Phil, most of the girls that were younger were intimate. We just were. Like maybe it took us a while to figure out what we wanted, but most of us tried it and most of us liked it. And it was only the 40 somethings that were just figuring their stuff out with a long history of cross dressing that had a marriage that were interested in girls. Like, I'm not saying there weren't exceptions, but generally speaking, like there were a lot more trans girls back then that were into men. And I
are
swear
you
to
saying
God,
are you saying
yeah,
men, or are you including bisexuals in that?
I think there were people that it took them a while to figure out their feelings on estrogen. So there was some bisexuality. But what I noticed when I transitioned is most girls that tried men liked men because men are great. So I don't know. It's been very stunning to me to see this rise of trans girls dating each other, which just was not a thing as much when I did this, but more than that, like seeing so many trans girls that are into girls. I really can't make sense of it. It's very confusing.
Well, I mean, it makes complete sense to me that the trans girls that date each other, they're GAMP, like gynandromorphophilic. They're
So
attracted
what?
to
What?
that's
Like, okay.
it's attraction to like pre-op trans women, basically like
Okay.
like a woman with a penis aesthetic.
So
Like
same thing chasers have?
yeah, yeah.
So
It's
you're saying trans women are the biggest chasers? Is that what you're
they
saying?
are, but they like sort of exempt themselves from that category because they're like I'm trans, so they don't. But yeah, they are. Autogynephilia is highly correlated with gynandromorphophilia.
With
Um, that's why I
anthromorph.
just say GAMP.
Yes, GAMP. But
Um,
help me saying it so I can say it in my public role.
Gynandromorphophilia.
Gynandromorphophilia. Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah,
say
yeah,
that 3 times in the mirror.
right. It's probably not the best one for political appearances for a normie audience, but yeah, it's basically a lot of trans women are attracted to other trans women, in
I
particular
can't
like
even imagine
pre-op.
that. Oh my god.
Yeah. Well, I yeah.
Like, I
Well,
love
I
my sisters, but I would not date a sister. That would be so gay. It'd be double gay. That's weird.
right. I mean, it is kind of another kind of gay, like in the sense that they have the same biological sex, but they also have the same gender in the sense that like they both have cross-gender identity. And so yeah, it's double gay in that sense, for sure.
But this is what I don't understand, and it's this other break I have with other trans women. Like, they want to keep that part. Like, that is horrifying. I've always been horrified by that. I can't, like, the number of girls today that don't get GRS, what we used to call SRS. It's really surprising to me. Like, we used to have just depression over not being able to afford SRS because we actually had to save up $24,000 and like $2,000 to pay for it. And today it's a few $1,000 copay and you can go anywhere and get it instead of getting on three people's lists in the United States and no one wants it. It's just like what's going on, Phil? Help me understand this.
Well, like I said, a lot of them are gonadromorphophilic, and
Okay.
the trans porn, like the online trans communities are also like often they'll have a lot of trans porn in them. And
Ew.
so I think what happens is sort of their erotic the sort of their erotic target preference, the type of entity towards they're attracted to,
Mhm.
they're attracted to trans women the most. And so they also get attracted to being that. And this sort of protects them from genital dysphoria, to be able to see the sexual worth in being a pre-op transsexual, be able to see like that's hot, that has value, and that's beautiful. That helps them feel more okay with their anatomy.
What is the long-term health outcomes for them? Because I guess,
You
I
know,
mean,
this
that's,
hasn't been measured.
yeah.
like just in general, the long-term health outcomes aren't really measured that well, and it's not like they're breaking it down by etiology either.
It just seems to me like, I transitioned in my 20s. By the time you're in your 40s, life as a woman looks very different, right? So you should have a plan for that. And if you're like, it's just hard for me. Like, does your identity just, do you keep seeing that as erotic? Or like, are you going to want to eventually date men? I
I think
don't
it
get
changes
it.
over
Yeah.
time. You know,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of the ones you see that are say like all into trans women now, and that might change as they get older. Um, it changes over the lifetime. When you have
Hmm.
autosexual trans identity, it's sort of like a continual process of being constructed. Like anything that reinforces it tends to make it stronger, and so that identity solidifies. And if your preferences change over time in terms of like
Hmm.
what you find most beautiful or most hot, that will alter sort of how you want to live your life. But also as you age, um, libido tends to go down, and so they'll, they'll probably change in how they choose to express themselves with time.
Yeah. I don't know. I I'm sorry about my voice. I would never try to withhold health care from anyone like that, but it does seem reasonable to me. This is what I would say is a fundamental bedrock of treatment should be informed consent, right? And what I wish we were more willing to do is, I think you really hit the nail on the head earlier, saying that therapists need to be more educated on the types of this. And I wish we could like talk more directly to people about what's going to happen to them, like on down the line, because I think like you need a plan with that. Like, my plan was pretty straightforward. Find a man, fall in love, get married, and have a normal life. Like, I don't know. I think that's it definitely has a complication, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do think that it would be good for therapists to know some more of these subtleties of the sexuality, because I think if there's a trans woman who is really attracted to pre-op trans women, it
Yeah.
might be a sign that um, getting bottom surgery might not benefit them.
Yeah,
'Cause,
exactly. Yeah.
like, it could be a contraindication for that procedure, and so it seems really important to me that, um, that clinicians can understand just basic 101 level stuff like that.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, all we're trying to do, Phil, is build a healthcare system that's gonna like give people better outcomes, and that's what I'm hearing from our talk today. Is that's going to involve research. It's going to involve more clinical education of people, but I think also we need to change this metaphor. That I think there's this idea with trans people that a good healthcare system is just going to say yes to everything. And I don't think that's actually true. I think it's probably a role of a therapist to challenge things and help make sure that you're on the right course. And yeah, I don't mean to be personal, but you were like, this is something I think about a lot. You're a type 4 transsexual, right? And you've got a type 5. That is a edge case of which way it's going to go. And you deserve to unpack that with a therapist and figure out what is going to be the best life for you. Maybe you should transition, maybe you shouldn't. But I think a really effective healthcare system owes you like really examining those feelings and being upfront about the science and what we know, if that makes sense.
yeah, I mean, I wish it was like that. I remember when I went to a therapist shortly after learning about autogynephilia, and I told her
Mhm.
that I I had autogynephilia, and it's like why I was dressed the way I was, and she had never heard of it.
Yeah,
And then the next session she comes in and she doesn't like the concept because some trans women say it's invalidating. And I'm just like, my God, you're like social justice programming is make it so you can't even do your job
I'm
right.
so
You
sorry.
know?
That
I
must
mean,
be
it didn't,
insulting. Yeah,
I mean, I wasn't that, I was more disappointed in her. I mean, I didn't see it as personal attack because I was pretty confident that I was correct. I'm pretty
seems like you
stable.
were. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I'm stable in the identity that I have, and that's part of why I think it's useful. Because I think people that have gender issues, they want some sort of identity label to attach to their feelings of, you know, dissatisfaction or wanting to be the other gender. And I I find it useful to have the category of say like autogynephilic or autoheterosexual because that's a stable trait that will not change no matter how much I transition. Like if I were to pursue medical transition, I would still consider myself to have that orientation. So it seems like a
sure.
stable anchor for identity. And um, the cool thing is, no one's like the only people telling me I'm not this thing are often people that actually have the orientation, but just can't accept that about themselves. You know?
You seem pretty autosexual to me, for what it's worth. So I'm not
Yeah.
going to deny that part of you. I want to talk to you about meta attraction though, because I've got a hard question for you. Do you read a lot of romance novels by chance?
No.
You should read some romance novels
No, I
because
know that they
here's
read like meta attraction.
they
Like there's
really
definitely
do.
yeah,
Yes.
there's an
Well, let me
overlap,
just
but
finish my point
yeah.
so people can understand it at home. So, if you read a romance novel, here's the plot of every romance novel out there. Okay, you've got the girl that is just kind of attractive. She's just normal, and she's out there and she meets some man, and they don't like each other, or they can't get together, or something like that at first. And then she undergoes some transformation and becomes absolutely beautiful. Like one I just read, like she's like she got fake married to a billionaire and had to convince the billionaire's family that they were actually married together. So she's going uptown to get dresses and her nails done and makeup and all that kind of stuff. And then they're trying to get together and the sexual attraction kind of comes and there's these lurid descriptions sexually. Like romance novels only have one love scene and it's always at the end when all the tension culminates and it's always like touching my like it's very erotically written and like this helped me understand like my sexuality so much because I'm going like, oh, this is normal heterosexuality, like what I'm feeling. So which is why I read so many of them. So like what's your answer to that? Because I think meta attraction, it doesn't make sense to me personally.
I think it meta attraction, it often has a superficial resemblance to romance novels, like how women write about their sexuality. Um, but I think it's fundamentally different from female typical heterosexuality,
In
even
what
though there is,
way?
well, just that the without a gynephilia, it's caused by sort of a mechanism of internalized heterosexuality, whereas with female sexuality, it's external heterosexuality. And like they have reasons, women have evolutionary reasons for caring about how men perceive them. Because
Yeah.
they basically, since males are stronger, they have to be, they want to be desirable and valued by the man so that he can protect and provide for them. And so I just think it's different. Like even though there's superficial resemblance, I think the psychology is ultimately different.
So see, okay, but you've got to admit, Phil, that all the people that write about this stuff with meta attraction, like Lawrence, not into dudes. Like you, I don't think you're into dudes. Like, could it be that y'all just don't like you talk about attraction events so clinically that it is fun? It's honestly hilarious to read. Like, there's just so much you don't understand.
Well, yeah, I'm not attracted to men. Um, like I
You've
think that's
never
pretty
tried it
clear.
once, really?
No, I'm not really interested. I don't. I think for it to work, I would have to for it to like be satisfying overall. I'd probably have to have a more female typical appearance, or like have to find a guy that's way bigger or something. Like I'm ultimately not that interested in pursuing meta attraction because I think it would lead me towards like I'm trying to trying not to reinforce the things that are unobtainable in terms
Oh,
of
that
like
makes
trying to
sense.
maintain long-term
Yeah.
satisfaction.
I guess it's like attraction to men. It is so. I'm trying to think how to explain this. It's like a fire that is slow and it takes a long time to build up. And it's just different things set it off. Yeah, I remember this changing, like from the difference in testosterone versus estrogen in how like sexual attraction worked, that it was very, very visual before. And then when you spend a lot of time on estrogen, it's much more like, I'll give you an example. I was having lunch a few weeks ago with a really famous gay friend of mine, and we have this waiter, and he's not that cute, but he comes over to our table and he's young. He flashes me a smile, and I tell a joke. He just sasses something right back at me, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, he's very cute. And the gay guy I was with just didn't notice any of this. And then as we were leaving, some guys leaving the gym, and he remarks on his legs and how muscular they are. And I just never would have noticed in a million years because I'm not saying they're interacting with him. I just think there's a difference in how this stuff works that a lot of the meta attraction analysis just completely doesn't understand, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we might have to disagree about meta attraction. Like I'm pretty, I think I have a pretty good grasp of it, but
Okay.
um, yeah, I I'm curious about like um, what do you think a stable like steady state solution to the transgenderism would look like in the sense of like a few generations from now? What do you think sort of a stable policy would be in terms of managing transgenderism and how it fits into society?
Well, like if I could wave my magic wand and design the public policy myself,
Right, yeah, but it would have to be one that like in terms of like realistic and like politically stable that enough
sure.
people like
Well,
yeah.
this is the priority that I see, and this is going to upset some people, but this is what I see. I think that we've made a real mistake conflating MTFs with FTMs. It's a different pathology. The motivations are doing it, and the number of detransitioners. I believe we need to really, really aggressively pump the brakes on the number of FTMs that are transitioning, just because the regret rates are so high, and also testosterone is so powerful
It
that,
is, yeah.
if you're doing it at 22 versus, 14, it's going to make a difference, but not that big a difference. So,
Right, there's not as
um,
much of a rush with
that's right.
the female.
That's right.
Yeah.
One of my biggest missions, and this is just getting really honest with you, Phil. One of the reasons I got involved and decided to come out publicly is I'm worried if we stay on this course that MTF children are going to lose all transition care. And I want to be clear, I think it's being overdiagnosed. But there's some kids that have all six criteria aggressively, um, are going through major depressive episode. This just going to cause lifelong trauma if we don't do that. So what I want to do, what I would advocate is aggressive NIH grants to start to develop a clinical pathology to start to be able to weed those kids out, because they do look very similar to, kids that are going to grow up to be gay. So I think I think raising the standards significantly when we decide to medically intervene with children, that is mission number one. Um, you know, this is a wider mission, and I suspect we're going to have strong alignment on this. Phil, the community is not healthy. It's not happy. It's broken. It's neurotic. It's barely employed. It's not doing things with, like, it's not succeeding. We've got to shift the trans culture significantly. And part of that, I think, is a lot more mental health care. It's very apparent to me there are a lot of people out there with untreated comorbidities. But I also think it looks like going back to what we used to do, which is tell people bluntly, not everyone needs to transition. Like, think through this. If you can manage it in other ways, you should. So I think like those changes, and also I think we need to radically, I think we need to revert both the standards of care back to the standards of care six, and the version of gender dysphoria in the DSM-5 is a fucking joke. That it's
It
just
basically, yeah, basically any
two out of those
autogynephile will get
six. Yeah,
diagnosed with dysphoria based on how it's
100%.
written. Yeah.
100%. It's crazy. And we also need aggressive science to start, figuring out these non binary people and figuring out to what degree medical intervention is going to suit them. So, all these things are going to take aggressive research and a far more sophisticated public policy conversation. So, does that match with your thoughts on this? What are kind of your feelings?
I feel similarly that um transition in females and transition in males should not be considered similarly because, like
Mhm.
you said, testosterone is so intense, its effects are so quick and irreversible
Yeah,
that I think basically the push for access to youth medical transition, I think it was primarily forwarded by autogynephilic transsexuals
do you
who,
think so?
yeah, I in terms of, yeah, that they wish that they had been able to avoid male puberty. Um, and
But I wish that too, like with all my heart. And it's not as much of how I look, as much as I think my career would be in an even better place today if I had not had so much trauma that nearly killed me. My trip to rehab was really, really serious at 22. I was doing every drug I could get my hands on. Like, I'm really lucky I lived through that.
yeah, yeah, I just do think that demographically, based on how I like infer the etiology of the transgender population by adding up the
Mhm.
non-homosexuals, um, the vast majority of male to female transitioners are of autogynephilic etiology. So just demographically, they will be the most influential in the movement, and what they want will sort of be the priority. And a lot of them really wish that they could have avoided male puberty.
Of course.
And I think that they made the mistake of just like treating trans as one category instead of different based on the sex and also based on etiology. Like I see it as four different things. And
But wait, let's explore this a little bit. Why does, like, for the sake of this discussion, let's just assume what you just said is true, that it's based on AGP and wanting to avoid male puberty. Why is that bad? Because they have terrible psychological damage from that too. Do they not? Or am I
right, yeah, no,
misinterpreting that? Yeah.
my worry is that it between the two sexes and two ideologies, like the
Mhm.
autogynephilic trans women are just one of the four groups that are being grouped as trans, and so by
Right.
treating trans as a monolithic thing, it's basically
Oh,
yeah
so
my
you're not advocating against autosexuals being able to transition.
no my
Right.
guess is like I still think the science is bad overall in terms of saying
Yeah.
whether it's good or bad,
Yeah.
but I think if eventually there is science that is strong, I think it will show that the autogynephilic transitioners might be the safest to transition
Really?
at a
More
younger age.
than
Yeah,
HSTS? Really?
yeah, because some of the motivators for HSTS aren't there like they used to be, like sort of discrimination against homosexuals and such. Like there's less
Oh,
social
but
reason.
that's not why I did this. I don't care about that. I wish I could have just been a gay dude. That would have been great.
Right? Yeah, I mean, I wasn't like necessarily saying your experience would fit in with it, but just with
Yeah,
like just thinking of these broader categories, I think that there tends to be there's homosexuals transitioning in the modern world, they get less of a social win in terms of like avoiding homophobia, like because homophobia is not as rampant anymore. And this is a good thing
sure.
that this change has happened.
But that has literally nothing to do with why I transitioned.
Right. Yeah. I wasn't saying it was your particular
But I
case.
don't think it is Kess's either, who's a really good friend of mine.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think ultimately the homosexual type of gender dysphoria is it seems to be like it's sometimes euphemistically called early onset gender dysphoria, and it's
Hmm.
sort of like a fundamental gender identity disturbance of
Yeah,
like before someone has a gender identity formed that they feel that they don't fit in, and I think there's quite a few gay people that have had this experience, but then upon hitting puberty they realize they recontextualize their experiences as, oh, I'm just gay, like once they realize they're attracted to the same sex. And I'm not saying all of them feel that way, but historically, back when there was more discrimination against homosexuals and there was desistance in studies, most of the early onset gender dysphoric males, the boys, they
hmm,
most of them desisted.
sure. But that's not the reason for. In my view, I don't think that's why HSTS transitions. I mean, it is. I can only speak for myself, and from talking to Cass, I think this is what she's felt too. Like, just there's a. Well, I'll just speak to myself. Like, there is a way that felt normal to interact with the world, and a way for my body to feel correct, and anything that is not that has just been really, really painful and wrong. And it's really hard to describe, but like just shutting down, like not being able to function unless it's just like you can't go on, like you just can't do anything in life as a man. I don't know how to say it any better than that.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, I mostly just I understand the autosexual type more
Sure.
deeply, and there actually haven't really been many good studies on the homosexual type, especially since they sort of get mixed in together as trans, and so
But I am
uh,
trans. I think I'm
right,
trans.
right. But I would like to see there be studies conducted on the
Mhm.
homosexual transsexuals to see that like what they benefit from versus because if they get mixed in with the larger autosexual population, it's going to sort of obscure possibly like the optimal way of treating them.
It sounds like you're unsure about my own healthcare.
I'm not like I said, I'm not talking about you.
Well, about
I'm
this type's healthcare, I think we would say.
I'm I think that it's I just I just think transition gives autosexuals like directly what they want. They want their body to be more like the other sex. They want to live as the other sex. And I think for homosexuals it's not as direct, like it's not as straightforwardly giving them.
That's correct. It was about behavior for me first and foremost. And then the body would probably be 10% of it, and dating would be 10% of it.
Right. And so yeah, I'm just concerned that like that since research is not being done on these groups as
Hmm.
distinct groups, it might not arrive at findings that pertain to each group.
Hmm.
And yeah, so in terms of like I I'm wary of you mentioned being wary of female transitioners,
Yeah,
like and how many of them are detransitioning. I do think that is definitely a concern, and that if trans people want to maintain access to medical care, they're gonna need to like pump the brakes on some aspects of transition. And
obviously. Yeah.
I think females transitioning, it might not fit in with feminism equality instincts or whatever, but the sexes are different. And since they are, and testosterone is such a hell of a drug, like we really should be a little more cautious about transitioning female to male.
I don't think there's anything feminist about taking a girl that is feeling normal anger and frustration about all the weird stuff that happens to girls at puberty, like being sexualized by creepy old men, or being frustrated with being talked over, and to tell them all their problems are going to go away if they just take some transition and become a man. And I also think like there's a whole discussion we need to have about the erasure of butch lesbians who exist much more rarely nowadays. So this is not my bag. I don't really focus on FTM politics so much, but as a political professional, I can tell you with high confidence this is causing a problem. The non-binary stuff for children is a political problem, and the community's response to this has been shut up. It's not a problem, and this is not going to hold. So we can get serious about dealing with this, or we can lose everything, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that sort of call for moderation
Yeah.
and caution, because yeah, that's part of why motivated me to speak out about autogynephilia and autoandrophilia. Is I was concerned
Mhm.
that there was like this ROGD thing, like if it is real, like I think it could be curtailed if the people that were experiencing gender distress, like if there's a girl that was thinking about transitioning and then she learned that there's like two types of dysphoria and was like, hey, I don't relate to either of these, like then there's a good chance that maybe transition wouldn't benefit her if she
Yeah.
doesn't have one of the known types of dysphoria. And so yeah, I think that I want to optimize the amount of people who benefit from transition and minimize
Yeah.
the proportion who are harmed by it. And I think the way to do that is to use accurate constructs that map onto reality.
Yes. Yeah, I think the problem is the politics are coming first and the science
Right.
is coming second now, and that's not the right answer here. So, yeah, I particularly think it's really problematic to take parents and to tell them if they don't automatically affirm their child that they're going to commit suicide. Now, I want to be clear. You can look at my wrist right here, and you can see like cuts from me trying to kill myself. It's a real risk, and I'm very lucky to have survived. But I also think like a 13-year-old that decides that they are non-binary, I think it's just such a different pathology that the suicidal ideation is not a helpful paradigm to reach for right away. And I think we need a more sophisticated conversation with parents about that.
Yeah. And I think it would be great if there was more research done into non-binary in the
Oh
sense
God.
of they they need to be administered questions that ask about cross-gender eroticism to figure
Yeah.
out which proportion of them are caused by autoandrophilia and autogynephilia, um, to sort of figure out which proportion of these um, may develop genuine gender issues and they're just using a new fangled construct to make sense of their experience.
Mhm.
Um, because I think a lot of non-binary people have they have the same sort of gender feelings as binary trans people, but they're interpreting them in a different way.
Do you think so?
For the autoandrophiles and autogynephiles, yeah, I do.
But I'm not sure that's the right paradigm, since the majority of non-binary people are assigned female at birth.
Right, and like I said, that's why I think it'd be really important to figure out which proportion of them are autoandrophilic.
Sure.
Um,
I
because
mean,
like
like, just to give a concrete example, I don't know if you saw my tweet the other day about the dude with the breast implants and the beard. Like, that dude's just clearly autosexual, right? Like, we agree on that.
in all likelihood, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, just by default, I assume that until proven otherwise, just because of the demographics of like the trans community. Like
I mean,
it's
enjoys being perceived as man, enjoys having boobs. I mean, enjoys like confusing people. That doesn't sound like HSTS to me, but I don't
well,
know.
right. It's definitely not. That's not homosexual transsexualism. No, but
Yeah,
it's and that person probably, I would say they might just have sort of an intermediate degree of
right,
autogynephilia. You know.
right. So why can't we go back to, if you don't really have to transition, don't transition. Transition is, it's terrible. Like, it saved my life, but if you don't have to do this, don't. It's not fun having your face taken apart. It's not fun having the surgery downstairs. Like, every part of this is really signing yourself up for some difficulty. And I don't think it's helpful to talk about it like it's anodyne, right?
Right. Yeah. No. I think part of the issue is in progressive circles because they think in terms of oppression. Basically, you kind of within social justice circles, you get more clout and you get taken more seriously if you have more oppressed identities, so to speak. And so there is some motivation to identify as either non-binary or trans.
It's
Um,
crazy. It's crazy to me. I'm old enough to remember when it was so shameful to be trans. It's crazy to me that anyone wants to be this today.
right, like I'm sure you saw Ace Ventura as a kid. Like that was sort of
Yes.
how that that was sort of how trans people were treated in popular culture. Um, and the trans movement has made big gains in terms of making it so in everyday life, less people decide to like take out their frustrations or treat trans people poorly. Like they've made some good positive gains in
Sure.
that, and I think um, they've kind of overshot with just not having any guardrails on transition and also trying
Yep.
to redefine what men and women are because then
Yes.
that
It's
makes
crazy.
most people defensive because they're like, who are you to say, sort of how trans people feel of like, who are you to say what I am? Like, I think cis people feel that when you're like trying to redefine what being a man or a woman is to
But
them,
Phil, I
you know?
feel that as a trans woman. I feel like their entire political mission to destroy gender, I like being a woman. I like everything about it. Like, I understand I'm a deeply imperfect, like inadequate, like I understand I'm missing so many of the parts of it, like childbirth, like I deeply wish I could have. But the best, like, I don't want a future where I'm considered like it instead of she. That's my worst nightmare.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, the trans movement's done great at getting to the point of getting called she instead of it. And uh, I think they got to dial it back on the redefining man and woman. And they need some guardrails, particularly on the female transition. And I like honestly, like for people that want to transition bad enough, like it's not that hard to buy drugs online. Like if they had to,
Brianna Wu does not advocate this. If politicians looking at this in the future, I disavow, but
Right.
please proceed. Yes.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying like I'm not making a moral statement here about whether it's good. I'm just saying it's literally the case that like for regardless of hormones like that and any drugs can be bought online. And um so there needs to be some guardrails put on medical transition, particularly for females, because it's
Can you
I don't
get
yeah.
testosterone online like you can estrogen?
Yeah.
Theoretically. Can you?
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
inject Chinese testosterone into my body, though my husband's is pretty good. But like,
Um It's really, yeah, tons of bodybuilders buy that sort of stuff
Really?
online.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah, and it's the glory of the markets. If people want it, it will be available.
Gosh, sorry about my voice today and being so hoarse. Apologies. I've been doing events all week. Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I guess I'd never really thought about how you would get black market testosterone. My project was to kind of get rid of it. So,
Right. Well, I mean,
priority.
yeah, I don't like. I'm not saying it's good that it's available, but just like
Yeah,
realistically, any drug is available online, and so the idea that we need to that girls need access to testosterone or else they'll kill themselves. It's just like
it's a
if
little
they're gonna kill
crazy.
themselves before like trying to buy a black market drug, like that, I don't think the access to the drug is the problem here.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. I understand the sentiment, but I don't stand by that. But I understand where you're coming from.
Right.
Let
Yeah.
me ask you this: as someone, one of the disadvantages I feel I have at this, Phil, is ultimately I'm a pretty good politico. I'm pretty good at media. I'm really good at back channeling. That's my superpower. But I'm not a scientist. And I would love, like, I had a list of questions I wanted to ask you today. What, in your estimation, is the biggest barrier to getting better trans science? Because as best as I can tell, I can't tell you how many times I've looked at a study, and first of all, it's going to just lump non-binary and trans people together as if we're the same thing into this just soup of people. But it also tends to just be like these self-reported surveys, and I think, like, I don't have to tell
I
you the
mean, that's
problems with.
psychology. That
Yeah.
that's just that comes with the field.
So, but how do we, like, I'm just consistently disappointed with the research that I'm looking at. And I
Yeah,
talked
it's
to my
mediocre.
husband. Yeah. How do we
Yeah.
improve this in your view?
Um Separate by ideology and by sex.
Okay.
That males and females should be subjected to separate statistical analyses. They should not be mixed together. And this even includes non-binary, that the male and female non-binaries should be analyzed separately. And for example, like, because if you see that, say, like, non-binary of someone born male, if their sort of stats show up similar to the MTFs,
Mhm.
it'd be like, okay, this kind of makes sense here, right?
Right.
um but
It sounds
I,
like sticking with surveys. It's the way the cohorts are separated. That's your biggest objection to it?
well, I mean, more fundamentally, that there aren't they're not being administered items on cross-gender fantasy,
Right.
and so the autosexuals aren't being identified and analyzed as a distinct group, and
Sure.
this obscures findings for the homosexual group and then any potential third groups that may or may not exist. And I think the way for the science to be better is all these trans studies should be administering items about cross-gender eroticism or other sorts of
Mhm.
indicators of autosexuality that won't get false positives for the homosexual types.
Sure.
And basically the studies need to separate by ideology and by sex. And like that's why I say like they need to be separated into like four different groups, at least for research purposes, because they are fundamentally different psychologies and leading to the situation.
Huh. I hear that criticism, and I think it's based in reality, and I would love to see that breakdown as well. But I don't think that's the central issue. I don't think
What do you
that's the
think it
central
is?
problem. I think, like, just the quality of the science is ass, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it's activism pretending to be science.
Correct. It's run by grad students. Like, you look at the credentials of the people doing it, it tends to be people working on their master's degree, passing out surveys to graduate students. It's really, to
Oh,
undergrad.
that's funny. I didn't even
Yeah.
pay attention to the credentials. I just looked at the study. I'm like, this is not good.
Well, go look at the people actually doing it, especially on the
Yeah.
non-binary side. You're not going to be impressed. And,
No, it's
like,
trash. The non-binary studies are awful.
I mean, how can I don't understand why any doctor in the country would do a surgery like to medically affirm this stuff when we have no idea if it helps or not. I want to know. I would guess it probably helps some people, but I would also guess it's not going to serve a lot of people. And we need to have a methodology to figure that stuff out. So, what I want to see is I want to see a higher class of researchers go into this. Yeah, we appreciate Daddy Ray and Daddy JMB taking for the team out there doing so much research on this, but we need a new generation of researchers to look at this stuff and to really get serious grants and to do it. It cannot just be like self-reported surveys. We need to go through and we need to like clinical assessments of psychology. We need to really look and see if people are employed. We need to really understand what the long-term psychological prospects of this are. And that's just, I think, if we can, because like what I would suspect happens is I see a lot of trans people that are sold a bill of goods, like transition is going to solve all your problems, and it doesn't. You've still got all this damage that's sitting there, and you've got to deal with it. Yeah, I say this as someone that had to deal with a lot of this stuff too. Like you need a lifelong commitment to working through some of this trauma, and I think, as best as I can tell, a lot of the community is not interested in self-reflection and improvement. There seems to be a lot of blaming everyone but yourself for your situation, which I don't think it's leading people to good outcomes.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think the biggest impediment to good research being done is the trans community itself.
I agree.
Because
1000%.
if you diverge from the accepted script, then you'll get attacked. And the researchers know this. There's very few researchers that are willing to do any research related to autogynephilia, for example.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they saw what happened to Michael Bailey, like with
Yeah.
that insane attack that those trans women did, and researchers have been scared of it ever since. And they've seen how powerful leftists are when they decide to cancel people. And someone that works their whole childhood and university career to become a researcher,
Yeah.
like they're not gonna stick their neck out, even if it's important to try to research it, to research autogynephilia or autoandrophilia. And like I think, like, I hear your critique of the whole self-report problem of these studies. But I
I
think,
think it's valid. I just want to be clear about that.
yeah, no, it is.
There are other kinds of science. Yeah.
It is. But in terms of like the pragmaticness of getting large samples, self-report is the way to do it. And the sort of clinic-based studies, they cost a lot more. It's a lot more effort, and there should be some of those for sure.
Yeah.
But like it's understandable why they're not as common because of the expense and manpower needed for those.
How about this? Can you give me any ethical reason why these clinics that are transitioning children, a policy I support? And again, I'm going to remind you, I came out specifically to save access for children having health care. Can you give me any reason why they are not releasing their data to the public, like made anonymously?
Or even recording data in the first place.
Right. Is there any reason for this
No,
that you
that's
can
like
possibly
a
justify?
huge concern of mine that, like,
Huge.
I think if this youth medical transition is to continue, there needs to be they need to collect data in a centralized database of every single transitioner so that we know the true regret rates, the true outcomes.
I agree.
Because right now there's people that are being dissatisfied with these transitions, and most of them don't even become outspoken detransitioners. It's
Of
a small
course not.
minority. Most of them are just like, it wasn't right for me, but I don't want to jeopardize the care of to other trans people.
Which
You
is
know,
important. I
right?
appreciate
Which is
that.
like
Yeah.
altruistic of them, but it's also exposing future people to harm, and so.
Do you remember Vioxx? Do you remember Vioxx when Vioxx got taken off the market? Yeah, this
Oh,
was a drug
vaguely.
we took to market too quickly. There were some molecules in it that were messed up, and 30-year-old men started having heart attacks. And we would not have caught that if we had not had data about who was being prescribed this and what the outcome was for them. And in the same way, like this is what drives, oh God, Phil, this is what drives me crazy about healthcare. This helped me. I want people to have this, but we've got to be interested in honest science about this. And whatever the answer is, if the research is good, we've got to stand by this. Is our mission politics? Or is our mission to actually make sure people suffering with the thing I have and you have go on and have productive lives? Like, I just don't understand why people are so uninterested in this question.
Right. I mean, I share that feeling that the truth is the most important. Like, truth must
Yes,
be obtained first, and then once we know true things, then we can engage in the moral discussions about what we should do about it. But it's first important to know what is true,
right.
and that part is being skipped, and people are going straight to the politics and
Yep.
moralizing. And we have children transitioning that are it's not being tracked in a central database, and like, so if it is going to lead to a lot of regret, like, we
Which we
should be
don't
able to
know
measure
either
that and
way.
find that
But just to
out.
be clear, yeah.
Right, like, we don't know either way, which I think is a problem. Um, and yeah, I mean, like I said, I think in terms of youth transitioners, if there is a group that is probably most suited for it, it would be some of the most strongly predisposed autogynephilic ones.
Mhm.
Ones that are not GAMP, ones that are just, like, very fixated on being female to the fullest extent possible.
Yeah,
Um,
which is
and
awesome. I mean, that's great.
right, and, like, I just I do worry about I think scientists have become scared because, like I said, they saw what transsexuals did to Michael Bailey,
Yeah.
and they've seen the sort of venom that someone will receive for being outspoken, for mentioning autogynephilia, for even just conducting research where you don't use the preferred terminology of the trans movement. Like, it and this it's the sort of thing where it's like the inmates are running the asylum
Yeah.
of trans research, and I can't tell you how many transgender studies I've read and then just been very disappointed by how
Oh,
shit
it's
they are.
trash.
They're
Yes.
awful.
And I'll go show it to a friend of mine. Like, I'll open it up and they'll be like, hey, this is garbage, right? Like, this is badly written, right? This is not drawing these conclusions. Look at what they did to this data here, right? Like, it's just garbage.
Yeah, but it creates sort of, the sort of more woke contingent of the left. They've created this alternative epistemological structure where
Mhm.
they have these studies that then cite a whole bunch of other studies, and so
Yes.
it superficially looks legit, but then if you follow the studies, they're not claiming what is being implied, and they're
It's
not conducted
crazy.
well. It's
Yes.
like it's yeah, it's like I said, it's doing politics that's just like it's like pretending to do science, but it's really just politics.
So, okay. So I feel like I do want to just take some time and do this just for a little bit of balance. You and I share an assessment of trans Twitter. We share an assessment of the science. We share an assessment that people are being transitioned, that it's not going to serve them. I do just want to take a moment and focus on the threat that trans people have to their health care, because we do have a political party out there that has made targeting trans people the new gay people. And they're equally, probably worse, not interested in science. And they are trying to take away life saving healthcare. When I go to Florida, something I used to do all the time with my husband, because it's cold in Boston in the winter, I have to make really sure to pack a ton of HRT now, because I don't have confidence that if a pharmacist knows I'm trans, that they will prescribe me HRT because they don't have to. So, I mean, can we at least admit there's a serious political project that has trans people on their back foot right now?
Yeah, I mean, that I think that backlash is happening because of the excesses of the trans movement. Um,
Uh, yes and no. I agree.
like, I'm not saying the backlash is justified. I'm just saying that,
No, I get it.
like, trying to redefine man and woman and then transitioning kids without there being good evidence for it yet,
Yep.
um, that understandably has caused a backlash.
How about just
And
being hostile to everyone right and left? That's not helpful.
right. And so I think that um while I don't like this the stuff that the way that Republicans treat the transgender conversation, I don't like they, like you said, they don't have a desire to truly understand it.
Nope.
But then again, I could say the same of many in the trans movement
No,
in
they
terms of
don't.
so it's I it's just troubling. There's basically like these two political forces that are ignorant in different ways going head to head. And I just think the only stable long-term solution will be to find reliable scientific knowledge that stands the test of time.
That's not going to help you if you don't have public advocates out there. They're willing to take on the community that truly, this is in my assessment, Phil, and I hope you can hear me on this. Like, we have a mutual friend. I'm not going to out her on the show, but she's a brilliant young woman, very invested in science and trans science, 100% autosexual. Love her. But she so naively believes that just doing the science is going to lead to public policy outcomes. And I got to tell you, my literal job is talking to legislators. It is a delusion, for
They're
lack of a
separate
better word.
things.
They're separate things.
Yeah.
You've got to have, this is my problem, is you've got the activist class, of which I would put like the Alejandras of the world out there, and they are
Yeah.
completely divorced from reality, don't care about science, or just have a political agenda, right? And then you've got the turfs, and unfortunately, like you were critiquing a GenSpec video the other day, I thought that was dead on. I think GenSpec is an organization that does not have trans dignity at its core mission. And I think until we have some organization or some structure of people that are truly, their top mission at the end of the day is trans dignity and good outcomes for these patients, no matter what the science says, and then allocating public policy resources for that community to help them with health outcomes. I think until we have a structure like that, scientists can do whatever they're gonna like want, but it's not gonna translate into public policy. So I think if you're serious about saving trans rights, you need to go read some history and understand we got for 40 years made a lot of progress in legal medical transition with moderate messaging aimed at in a bipartisan way, talking to patients, therapists, doctors, stakeholders, politicians. And until we're willing to approach this stuff from the middle again, I think we're on a suicide mission.
Yeah. I think that's a good summary that the trans sort of I would say trans movement, but like in the 80s it was probably still too small to be called a movement, but
Yeah,
it was the sort of people that cared about transsexuals and their well-being. They had a moderate approach. They
yeah,
understood that they were trying to assimilate into broader society, not to tear it down and deconstruct it.
yeah.
Um, and they made tremendous gains just by sort of garnering people's sympathy of like what it would feel like to have the distress of wanting to be the other
Yes.
sex.
Yes. And
And
talking to people with
yeah,
respect. Can I tell you a quick story, Phil? Like,
of
I
course.
will never forget this. When I transitioned in Mississippi, you got to understand, this was the dark ages. Jerry Springer was on TV. That's what people thought trans people were. And I got my letter and I started like going through the steps to change gender legally. And I will never forget getting my letter and going down to the DMV in Mississippi. You got to understand, this was 20 years ago. Bush had just won a second term. And I go down there and I'm just like, I'm terrified. And I'm talking to two extremely overweight, white Southern Baptist women with crosses around their neck. And they look at each other and they go, well, I think she should be able to change if she wants to. I agree. I've always thought that. And boom, sign the paper. Because I go down there, I'm non threatening, I'm talking to them. They were just like, this is a freedom issue, and trans people are not in my face all the time. I have no doubt that those women today would hate me and would say no to helping me out when they didn't have to. And until we can get back to getting buy in from conservatives by treating them with some damn respect, you are dooming trans people to have bad political outcomes in everywhere that is not a blue state.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I agree that they also would have those ladies at DMV would not have been kindly to you in
No,
today's age.
no,
And yeah, I think the trans movement, like, they need to make less enemies.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you can't create that many enemies and then still win if your numbers are as small as they are. Like, you have to basically just not be an asshole is a
yeah.
start, you know? Um, I don't find it that hard personally to, like,
I think you're
y
very nice. I like you a lot.
yeah,
You're a little
but it's
melancholic, maybe, but I like you.
right, 'cause I like, I'm not attacking people, and also when people do attack me, I don't take it too personally because it's usually just, A, they don't know me, and B,
Yeah,
like, it's some it's something about their own psychology that's getting them triggered. It's
100%.
not really me. Um,
Okay, so this is going
yeah.
long, but there's one more topic I absolutely must talk to you about. And I think this is something we're going to have very strong agreement on. You did, I forget, I think it was 3 videos ago, you were interviewing a detransitioner that was talking about how upset they were with the trans movement, that when you talk to them, they did not seem to have a love of women or respect for women baked into the culture anymore. And it seemed like the trans culture had really shifted to talk over women. And I
Yeah.
was sitting there just about breaking my neck agreeing with that. Can we unpack this a little bit? Because, like, I don't know what it's like for you, but when I transitioned, I can name you every single cis friend of mine that took me out shopping or taught me makeup or helped socialize me or invited me out to girly brunches to learn stuff like turn taking. Like, I am so thankful for those friends. And that informs like my very strong commitment to women's rights, which I don't see in the trans community today. Does that match your like perception?
Yeah, I think you're talking about my conversation with Hunter,
Yes,
the male
yes,
detransitioner.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, basically, I think in that interview, I described it as that trans people should take the gynophilia part of autogynephilia seriously, like, take the love of like, basically, the love of women
Yes,
upon which the transgender wish, comes from, like, taking it more holistically and making sure
yes,
that you're not harming women,
of
like,
course.
doing whatever you can to minimize that because, like, I wouldn't want to like, I think a lot of autogynephiles feel this way. A lot of autogynephiles are straight up female supremacists, like, they
Yeah.
love women, and part of their suffering is that they put women on such a huge pedestal and are sad that they can't be on that pedestal with them.
Oh,
And, yeah, I think that that's why it's important for the trans community to start, like, trying to police itself better, because we can't have trans women speaking over cis women, and it's you gotta have respect for like I said, take the gynephilia part of it seriously.
this is what bothers me. Okay, like there's a nuanced discussion to be had about when you should go into the bathroom if you're transitioning, right? And there is certainly a nuanced discussion to be had about getting naked in a locker room. I've done everything. I think I passed pretty decently. I don't use locker rooms. I shower at home just because I don't even want to risk making someone uncomfortable. And, I'm ashamed of my body. Like, there it is. So like there's no part of I think it's so upsetting to me that if you bring up a conversation about a woman feeling uncomfortable about being in there with like a non-binary person with boobs and a beard, that fear is automatically minimized by this culture. This actually makes me very angry. It feels very sexist to me. The same thing if you are so invested in changing the language around abortion to start calling women uterus havers, like that's just straight up misogynistic. And it really bothers me how few trans women seem to even be aware of this misogyny that seems to have infected our culture.
Yeah, I think that's because their priority is sustaining their self-image.
Yeah,
Um, and that's, I think most of that is just due to the psychology of the condition. And I don't know, I realistically don't know if it can be fixed
really?
anytime soon.
Doesn't
I
that
want,
conflict with what you just said, though, about putting women on pedestals and being female supremacists?
well, a lot of them do, but there's also some that their envy of women
Oh,
gets to the point of spite, and then it gets
ooh,
nasty, right?
that's weird.
Like the
Yeah.
sort of bitter envy. I'm sure you've seen that before of like trans women like complaining about cis women,
Oh,
um
yeah, it's crazy.
just and it's like a lot of, I think a lot of that frustration is just born out of their own frustration about their inability to be exactly what it is they value. And like I understand
Oh,
that, but it's like you gotta, sort of like trans people's inclusion is like, it's kind of contingent on the rest of society being able to accept it. and
sure.
and so I just think that trans people need to work better on assimilation and respect.
I agree. God, this is gonna sound so stupid to you, but so I'm at Moynihan train station 2 days ago, and I'm coming back from, I was doing a podcast, right? And so I'm in New York. I'm coming back to Boston, and these two women in front of me have just met each other at the train station. They've decided they're best friends. Older woman, younger woman. Just sitting there talking to each other, girl talk. And I'm just sitting there looking at my train, and they just look at me and loop me into the conversation. And I am sitting there, just doing girl talk with two complete strangers. We're laughing about this and that. And it's just, even to this day, I feel like an overwhelming sense of gratitude to be able to do that. Like my soul goes to the brim with happiness that, like, that small moment, something I never dreamed I would have had as a child, that I get that all the time now. And I think that's why, like, this culture of treating those women like they're an enemy, like, it just feels so abhorrent to me. It's actually very disturbing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's, I agree with you. I think there should be more respect and less entitlement.
Yeah.
I Yeah, like you said, this has been going long. So do you think this would be a
I'm
good
so
time?
sorry, Phil. I love to talk too much if you can't tell.
Um, yeah, I was curious. Like, how do you maintain sanity as a public figure?
I think I'm just broken at this point. So I don't know. I run a
Yeah.
lot. I value my marriage. I feel like Gamergate gave me an ability to take an astonishing amount of incoming criticism. So I think I just have a unique psychology at that. And frankly, transitioning in Mississippi 20 years ago probably gave me a little bit of grit. So I do have to say, I think it's very interesting. Like, I think a lot about why my psychology is so different than a lot of trans women, that I can take that much criticism and, I don't know, like, be a little less neurotic, if that makes sense. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, it's good to not take it personally,
Yeah, I know
basically.
who I am.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You have a stable sense of identity. But I think a lot of people, when they're transitioning at first, their identity is unstable because, they're wading into that cross gender
Sure,
identity. And
sure.
so there's an instability period, like the baby trans period, where there's like
Oh,
a lot of a lot of identity instability, and they can be touchy and defensive. But I think that long term, like someone that does transsexualism, like 20 years down the line, they're much more stable in their identity, and
I
hopefully the
think I'm a
trans
little more
community.
stable. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that as the trans community gets that ages, you know, it's like 20 years from now, that enough of them will have gained enough stability in their identity and enough maturity to where it changes the culture.
Well, if you and I can save that, we will play a part in that. So,
Yeah,
can I tell you,
hopefully.
I know we need to cut this off, but I just want to tell you, I really appreciate your work. I don't always agree with it. I have tons of issues with what you're saying, but I think we
That's
are,
fine.
I think we're going in the same direction. I think we have a similar political mission. And yeah, I really hope in the next few years we can work together and get this public policy back on track. I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but by my estimation, there are about maybe 20 people out there that are really serious about saving the ship. And I think you're one of them. So I hope we can work together and do what we can.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. The only thing we can do is try, right?
It could all blow out spectacularly. That could also happen.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna stop recording now. Thanks
All right.
for
It was
coming
so
on my
good to
channel,
see you.
Brianna.
Yes.